guys, what's going on? Zura over here. In this video I want to show you two games on Reti opening. Reti opening is starting with first knight f3 followed by g3 bishop g2 ideas usually. That was played today, March 6, 2023 on European Championships in Serbia. European Championships is a very prestigious tournament. It attracts a lot of strong players. 23 spots from this current tournament will qualify for the World Cup. So for professional players, this is one of the biggest events of a year, pretty much. First game we're gonna see here, we have a strong grandmaster, Abasov, who has crossed 2650 before, versus Italian grandmaster Sabino Brunello, who has crossed 2600 before, but I think he's more famous for his analytical work. Game starts with c4. I mentioned that Reti System is starting one knight f3. However, these two systems transpose into each other quite a lot, and that is what happened here. c4, c6 was played, knight f3, d5. If black is a Slav player against d4, if they play d5, c6, there's a very high chance that they handle Reti same way with c6, d5, and I think that is the case here. g3 in the spirit of Reti, and black plays bishop to g4. Now black wants to take there, obviously. The most natural move is bishop g2, undoubtedly. However, this is a deep theoretical discussion here. Probably d takes c4 or knight to d7, or takes on f3 first and then takes on c4. I think Nijat wanted to avoid here all that and goes knight e5 to attack the bishop on g4. This knight e5 jump is also pretty typical in these positions, so I wouldn't say it was quite a new idea. Bishop f5, queen goes to b3. So in this structure, black wants to get this bishop out before playing e6 and securing the center with triangle there. However, it does have a weakness. It weakens the b7 pawn, and white now tries to take advantage of that. Queen b3 hitting the b7 pawn, queen b6 to block it. Also a standard response usually in these positions for black to protect the pawn on b7. C takes d5. Now d5 pawn is under attack, so if takes back, simply queen takes d5. So black needs to eliminate queens off the board first, and then goes bishop e4, attacking the rook and the pawn on d5. The most natural here first would probably be c takes d5. However, white has knight c3, attacking the d5 pawn, and after e6 there will be knight b5 jump. Now c7 square is very weak, which I do not exactly see how can be protected. Knight a6 I think leads to rook takes a6, and then we have knight c7 and take the rook on the next move. With everything else in this position, the major point here is undeveloped kingside for black. Those pieces are completely out of the game. Well, maybe except bishop right now. Bishop is a little bit included. However, that was still hopeless. Now bishop e4 attacking our rook on h1 and the pawn on d5. I think this is where the first unexpected move for Sabino happens on the board. D takes c6. Now you can pause the video and see what is the white's idea in this position. Why are they simply giving up the rook? If you actually did that, pause video and took your time, congratulations. That speaks of your good work ethic, which I think is often more important than talent. Let's see what is going on here if black actually accepts the sacrifice and takes on h1. Now we do have this dangerous pawn on c6. However, we can't push it immediately because knight will simply get out, and then rook is covering the c8 square. So we need to distract the rook before pushing the pawn. How can we possibly do that? Well, with another rook. Rook takes a7. Now forcing rook to take back, and only then we push the pawn, and now 8th rank actually cannot be defended. That pawn promotes with the checkmate. If black tries to stop the checkmate there with e6, we promote by capturing the knight, and that pretty much winning the house. Will take on a7 and be a queen up there. So in a matter of 10 moves in this line, white managed to sacrifice 2 rooks and promote a pawn. How many positions do you know that accomplishes that in 10 moves? I cannot recall many. Knight takes c6 was played in the game. Now, if knight takes c6, then rook is still under attack, so white goes f3, attacking the bishop, and black's best chance, also according to the computer here, which was played in the game, knight d4, threatening knight c2, and then taking on a1, and then that knight will get out from b3. However, white didn't want to give up the rook there, plays rook to a4. Obviously, this is one of the natural moves, I think, if you are playing this with white. However, computer suggests this king f2 move to be better, and then the line goes knight takes b3, rook goes to rook goes to a3, attacking the knight, and also bishop is still under attack here, right? So if bishop takes b1, we take on b3, and now b7 pawn becomes the target, and then after e4, this bishop also comes with the devastating force on b5. So on rook a3, most likely black will have to take on c1, and then f takes e4, and the line here goes e6, attacking the rook. We can't move rook to c3 because this knight will then get out from a2 and b4. So rook a4 is the strongest move. Knight immediately runs out to b3, but now bishop comes in with another strong threats here. Bishop b5 check is unstoppable. Even on a6 we go bishop b5 because there's a pin, king e7, and then d4. On the next move, bishop will get back, something like rook c8, bishop e2, and we get the equal material where white has a very strong center, especially after knight c3, and black pieces are all still undeveloped. I think computer evaluates this position as almost winning for white already. So king f2 would be a better try, but rook a4 was played in the game. I think for a human perspective, this is very much understandable. Actually, there was another game played on this exact position a long time ago, and in that game, white also played rook a4. Bishop takes b1, rook takes d4. So what happened? We ended up, well, white ended up pawn up in this position. However, there are still some difficulties related to development. This rook and knight also in the center will become the target of black pieces on the next couple of moves, and that's what happens. f6, knight goes back to d3. I think knight had to go to d3 because if it goes to c4, then rook on d4 becomes uncomfortable. So knight to d3, e5, rook goes to c4. So white is still a pawn up. I think if bishop takes d3, then e takes d3, pushing d4 eventually, forcing this symmetrical position where we'll have 2 bishops against opponent's bishop and knight. C1 bishop is quite far from the game, but after bishop d3 takes d4, d3, that bishop, I think, will simply get out. This was critical position in the game. I think the only correct move here is knight e7 to keep creating problems for this c4 rook. Next, black wants to play b5 and come knight d5, and rook will not have a good square. So Knight e7, I think, would be best bet. However, black decides to play bishop d6, let that bishop out first, before bringing the knight into the game. But the move that was, I think, overlooked here for black was knight c5. Now, what is going to happen is after knight e7, white will have this very strong move e4, securing the d5 and f5 square, and then bishop again will come with a lot of initiative. So after knight c5, ball is back into white's court. b5 to save that pawn was played. Rook goes back to c3, and after knight e7, as we mentioned, e4 is played. Now b5 pawn is under attack, and white has secured the center as well. So white is simply a pawn up. b4 was played, rook to c4, rook b8, and d4. Finally, this bishop sees the daylight. After e takes d4, white immediately forces the trade of that dark squared bishop. Bishop takes f4, g takes f4, and black actually decided to resign in this position. You may think that's a little premature here, and I would probably agree. However, we are looking at the game of two strong grandmasters, and important detail to consider here is black had 1 minute left on the clock while white had 44. Okay, and also if we look at the board now, this bishop on b1 is completely out of the game. I think the only way to stop losing it would be d3 and then bishop c2. However, white will comfortably take that pawn, most likely b pawn up, and black will still face difficulties there finishing the development. For example, if short castle, there will be knight d7 attacking, forking two rooks on b8 and f8. So black decided he has had enough. Let's say game 2 played between a strong grandmaster from Hungary, Benjamin Gledura. I believe he currently resides in United States, versus a strong international master from Austria, Dominik Horvath, who has crossed the 2500 already, and I believe he should be waiting for his grandmaster title. Okay, this is one of those type of games where black player probably didn't realize where they made a mistake. Okay, one of my favorite types. Let's jump into it. Knight f3, d5, g3, g6. In Reti opening, white often develops the king side first. So modern approach would be challenging the center first and then developing the pieces, right? In Reti, which is considered a hyper-modernist opening, first white develops the pieces, secures the king, and then challenges the center. All right? So that's what happens here. g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, short castle. White even gives up the center here completely. After e5, black has total control. However, white plays d3 with the idea of challenging it on the next move with e4, and that's what happens. Now, white offers this queen trade pretty much on the d file, and if that happens, we get symmetrical position on the board, where actually both bishops are now fianchettoed, with the slight difference we have knight on f3, whereas opponent has knight on e7. So black goes short castle, doesn't take immediately on e4, and white goes for a very interesting try here, b4. I myself have played this position a bunch of times, and I think I used to play either knight c3 or knight d2, which are both very natural moves, but fact that black did not play knight c6 yet and b4 square is not under control, I think gives white this very interesting try to expand on the queen side before black finishes the development there. Okay, so black decides to take on e4. There was another interesting game actually played among Alienov versus Ponomaryov. I think knight c6 is also an interesting try, probably c3 and then takes on e4 or something like, for example, a6 stopping the b5 here. Would lead to an unclear game, so black instead decides to take on e4 and then trade queens. Rook takes d1. So one might think that this is a symmetrical position and should be very close to equal. However, there is a lot of play and black will need to be very precise in order to equalize. I'm actually not even sure what is the right way to equalize here, so I'm not gonna get into those details. I'm just gonna continue with the game. Bishop e6 was played here. White goes bishop e3, also bringing the bishop into the game. f6, securing the e5 pawn. Knight goes to c3. Now this knight is ready to jump to d5. I think there was another game in this very position. I believe Artemev beat Hikaru Nakamura in a very instructive game that continued with knight c6, and I'm not sure if Vladislav played immediately a3 here or knight d5, but it was among this these lines here. I think a3 with followed by knight d5 is what happened in that game. c6 was played in this game not to allow knight d5. However, it does create another holes into the black's position. Now dark squares become quite weak here. There are immediately a couple of flashing lights. I think d6 would be the one. Another one would be a5. Both of those squares are tailored for the knight, as you can see. So white plays bishop f1, preparing this transfer of a knight on d2 and then c4. King goes to f7, knight d2, knight d7, knight goes to c4. Alright, white knight lands on c4, threatening knight d6 here, so black is pretty much forced to play knight c8 to protect that square, and then knight is rerouted to a5. Now b7 pawn is under attack, which can only be protected with rook b8. Well, technically that pawn could be moved, but then c6 pawn would have dropped. So rook b8 and white continues the pressure with b5. Now c6 pawn is under attack. If c takes b6, which I think should have been played in the game and would give black the best chances here, knight would most likely take there, and then those two pawns are still quite weak. White also opened up the b file for the rook, so I think Dominik decided not to have any of that and goes c5 instead. My problem with this move, though, is it forces black into a very passive position. Well, black was already passive to start with, but again, everything is relative. Bishop c4 was played into the game for white. Computer suggests knight a4 to be much better, attacking the c5 pawn, and if b6, then bishop goes to c4. Nice intermediate move here, attacking the knight on d7, pinning the bishop. If bishop takes c4, there is rook takes d7 with the check, and then taking on g7 if king is moved to e6 square, and black's pawn structure will be ruined. A few pawns will get dropped there, so white is pretty much winning at this point. On bishop c4, black plays knight c to b6 to protect the knight on d7. Bishop takes e6, king takes e6, and knight lands on this dream outpost on d5. Rook f to c8, c4, clamping that knight on the on that outpost even more. Bishop to f8, rook a to c1. Bishop d6, rook c2. Threat I think after rook c2 is to play rook d2 and double up the rooks on d5. One thing I want to mention here is this concept of transforming one form of advantage into other. Now white has a huge strategical advantage in this position. However, we want to transform it into something more tangible, which would be material. Knight takes d5, c takes d5. Rook takes d5 would also maintain the advantage. However, this is where transforming one form of advantage into other comes into play. White creates a protected passer on d5, which we know that in the endgame is always a desirable thing to do. C takes d5, king e7, and actually also important detail to mention is c4 square. Now c4 will become a very comfortable blockading square for the knight. Not only blockading, but also putting the pressure on e5 pawn, as we will see in a little bit. Rook d to c1, rook c7, and now knight comes to c4. b6, keeping the space advantage here on the queen side with a4. a5 is played by black, so white doesn't have future prospects here to go a5 themselves. a5, and white plays f4. All right, so the maximum amount of progress has been made on the queen side. So white now tries to switch action to the king side. Rook f8, rook f1, rook c to c8, and second rook now comes to f5, doubling up, bishop c7, and it is time to gain more space. Probably king g2 would be one of the moves, but Benjamin decides to go g4. I believe after g4 here, g5 is the threat, so black decides to take on f4 with the idea of trying to set up some blockade on dark squares. Bishop f4, bishop takes f4, rook takes f4, h6. So if knight e5, I believe this b6 pawn is hanging, so that knight cannot be touched at the moment. h6, waiting for white to see how they make progress. King goes to g2, rook c to e8, h4. Now, final operation in the game. White plans on creating additional passer in the center. How would we do that? By sacrificing a pawn on g5 that would force now f pawn to move away, and after trading both rooks, well, if black would trade another rook here, white would be happy to trade, and then after e5 end up with these two monster passers. Black took on f8 with the knight, but that doesn't change much. White still goes e5 here, knight d7, rook to e1. Now if rook moves anywhere else, then e6 will be played, d6 will also be played with a check, and b6 pawn will also drop. So rook d8, king g3 were the last moves in the game. White plans on simply capturing both of these pawns, then protecting these central pawns and push them forward, on which black can do pretty much nothing, so they called it quits. Beautiful demonstration of how symmetrical Reti positions play out. Especially, I want to bring to your attention this structure after d takes e4, d takes e4, and queens off the board after queen d1. I think it's a standard position that is played quite a lot with both sides. All right, I hope you enjoyed these two games as much as I did. I might be a little biased on this structure since I've been playing it all my life pretty much, and I can relate to it a little more than probably someone who plays e4, let's say. All right, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.